the end of the war, the folks living around Martlesham have done a fantastic job developing a control tower as a museum. Since the end of the war, the folks living around... I send God's blessing from the 356 Fighter Squadron to all members of the Society for the highly professional manner they are perpetuating the history of this famous Royal Air Force station. General Strait is now 97 years old.
Second Lieutenant James A. Des Jardins. And one of the pages in the 356 Roll of Honour in the Church of St Michael and All Angels is dedicated to this young 21-year-old pilot. The story I'm about to tell you is about this young man. It's a remarkable story that has come full circle. James took off from Martlesham Heath at around 9:59 in the morning of the 25th of November 1944. There were two flights that took off from the 356. One was under the CO ship of Captain Don Strait, who we know very well, of course, and he led the 361st and the 360th squadrons. The second flight was Captain Tarbutton, who commanded the 359th. Their mission was in support for a bombing raid on central Germany. It was their 300th mission undertaken from RAF Martlesham Heath. It was a mission that Second Lieutenant James Des Jardins never returned from until 2012. His plane was hit by flak while strafing a railway marshalling yard. With his plane on fire, he climbed to 300 feet, but turned and crashed into the Vieira River floodplain. 67 years passed by. In 2011, while dredging part of the Vieira River floodplain in Germany, Lothar Ritzmann and his team found the remains of a P-51 Mustang and its pilot. His parachute and silk escape map were almost perfectly preserved. Lothar told me that following the crash, villagers did find some human remains and buried them in a makeshift grave close by. They were exhumed after the end of World War II and taken away, and we guess to somewhere in America, but we don't know quite where. At that time, of course, the identity of the pilot was unknown, as was the case in 2011 when the plane and further human remains were uncovered. The remains were taken to the Missing Military Personnel Department at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. With the assistance of DNA, the body was identified as that of Second Lieutenant James Des Jardins. James Jardins' nephew, Judge Des Jardins, travelled to Hawaii to collect the small white casket containing James's remains. The burial took place on the 15th of October this year, with full military honours, 68 years after James Des Jardins disappeared. The coffin was escorted by the Patriot Guard riders, not unlike the Iron Crows that you see here today. And they are made up mostly of ex-servicemen and are dedicated to ensure that all servicemen are given a military escort to their final resting place. Sadly, this was not the only wartime tragedy to touch this family. 2 months prior to James Des Jardins crashing, his brother, Lt Des Jardins, crashed flying a B-24 Liberator in the French Alps and was killed. Our society did not hear about the discovery of this until October this year. It was rather a strange coincidence, almost uncanny. On the 11th of October, and this was 4 days before Second Lieutenant James Jardins was buried in America, we were visited by a gentleman by the name of Dan DeMayo. Dan is the nephew of Mike Yannell, or Major Mike Yannell as he was when he retired. He's one of our vice presidents, and in 1944 was the CEO of the 360th Squadron, which of course was Second Lieutenant James Des Jardins' squadron. And both of them were billeted at Playford Hall. Captain Yannell, as he was in 1944, would have known Second Lieutenant James Des Jardins, albeit for only a matter of weeks, as he didn't arrive at Martlesham Heath until at the beginning of November 1944. We took our guest to the Church of St Michael on All Angels, where Dan looked at the 356th Roll of Honour. He asked to see the page relating to Second Lieutenant James Des Jardins. And remember, there are 72 pages in the Roll of Honour, one page for each of the Americans who you see in front of you there on their war memorial. As I say, he asked to see the page relating to Second Lieutenant James Jardine. Later, here on the Barrack Square, he took great interest in the inscription related to James Des Jardins. We were curious as to why his interest in this young man. And Dan related that in 1995, at the 356 reunion in Canton, Ohio, which several of us attended, he made the acquaintance of John Des Jardins, the nephew of James. John related to Dan the circumstances of James's last flight and disappearance. Dan kept this story in the back of his mind, and while on his visit to Martlesham Heath, the discussion he had had with John Des Jardins in 1995 flooded back to him. Dan's intention was to contact John Des Jardins on his return to the US and show him the pictures he had taken on his visit here, but events overtook him. On his return to the US, the very next day, the story of Second Lieutenant James Des Jardins and his return of his remains to the US broke on the US TV networks. Dan could not believe it and immediately contacted us with links to the TV coverage. Strange, uncanny, exciting, call it what you like. The return of James Des Jardins to his family is wonderful news. And to us here at Martlesham, another hero returns home. So when we hear the words later on in our service, the words, we will remember them. Let's just do that. Thank you.